I'm delighted to welcome Kate Grussing. Kate set up Sapphire Partners as a challenger search boutique after a successful career in the city, both at JP Morgan and McKinsey. As an early advocate of the benefits of diversity around the boardroom table and the Exco, Kate is said to have one of the best networks of anyone in the city. So pay attention, and I hope as many of you connect with Kate as you possibly can after today. Kate's a passionate believer in the thinking behind the 100-year life and the difference that people and culture can make to an organization's success. So here to tell us more and to introduce us to wonderful Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, whom we're really delighted to have with us in conversation on how we ensure we deliver for people and the planet now. Kate and Carolyn, over to you both.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Can you hear me okay? Brilliant. I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to have a conversation with Carolyn today as part of ECHO's Summit. I'd like to think maybe they've saved the best for last. I've long been interested in today's topics, and in my executive search practice at Sapphire, we are very motivated by clients that put people and planet at the top of their agendas. Whether our clients are global fund managers, banks, insurers, or big engineering companies or global law firms, our clients are all prioritizing hiring the best people they can find. And guess what? Everyone is more focused than ever on the themes we've been talking about on sustainability. I've had the pleasure of knowing Carolyn for over 25 years and watching her develop as a leader and having growing impact as an advisor, consultant, board director, thought leader, and now on the main boards of two pretty significant world organizations, HSBC and BAE. Carolyn has never shied away from speaking up and using her voice. So I'm really excited to have this significant topic of conversation with such an impactful and articulate thought leader. I'm just worried how we're going to fit it in the time Sandra's allocated. So Sandra, interrupt us when you want to open up the conversation, please. Carolyn, I might kick off with, in your 5 years as the Director General at the CBI, you will have made countless speeches on people and the planet, as well as looking at what are the policy changes or campaigns that the CBI could advocate for in support of these pretty big themes. I recall just last October, for example, shortly after the George Floyd episode, and really right before you retired from the CBI, the organization helped spearhead a massive campaign called Change the Race Ratio. That's one of many. Are you optimistic that our leaders in business and government are doing enough on both of the battlefronts we're talking about here today?
Well, first of all, Kate, it's such a pleasure to be doing this with you. I watched you for the last 25 years as well as a leader. And Sandra, it's wonderful to join you and this wonderful organization on this important day and important conversation. So, well, Kate, you're absolutely right. So the last 5 years, although there was Brexit always going on in the background, actually, the things that I am most proud of, and I think that the business community could be most proud of, were actually absolutely central to the things you're talking about today in terms of people and planet and also governance, actually. Because if I wind the clock back to 2015, when I took the helm of the CBI, we spoke for 190,000 organisations across the UK of all different sizes. I honestly think that some of the things we're talking about now were on the agenda, but the blue touch paper was lit around about 2015. I think coming out of the crash, rebuilding our economy, I was incredibly struck by, well, take for example, the real focus on diversity and the fact that there was real progress made in the boardroom. We can come back to the but in a minute. But gender diversity, I think, we got there in terms of the 25% and now going on further. Mental health. I remember in my first week at the CBI, Alistair Campbell got in touch with me. You know, Alistair actually leads the charge in terms of mental health on many fronts. He said, Carolyn, will you really lead the charge in terms of mental health in the workplace? And I found myself thinking, I want to do that, but I don't know if it's even on the agenda. And then within 2 years, it had become central to what the CBI did. Many companies were really opening up their conversations to real issues around mental health. And I think we've made such strides. The conversations we've had around purpose, the idea of it being a purpose-led organization is absolutely central. And the final thing I think that we can see that business has really led the way on, well, there are many things, but the central to today is on climate change. And I remember in 2017, we decided to put a letter together to Theresa May, the Prime Minister, to argue for a legislated net zero target. And I didn't know how many businesses would follow us. And there was a stampede. And we had hundreds of businesses signing a letter. And I know directly from Number 10 and from Theresa May that it was instrumental in there being a net zero legislated target. So am I optimistic? I'm hugely optimistic. But there is a really big but. And the big but is this. I think that execution has a lot of catching up to do. And to coin the words of Greta Thunberg, it can't be blah, blah. It has to be real action. And there's a long way still to go. So very interesting work by business in the community showing that about 2/3 of businesses have purposes, but less than half of that have plans to deliver their purpose. We haven't seen the progress in the pipeline of executives for women that we wanted to. And frankly, and you mentioned change the race ratio, there is so much more we still need to be doing on ethnic diversity at all levels in our businesses. So I'm optimistic. Climate is obviously the hugely crucial issue on all of our tables, but real plans, real action, real leadership, we've still got a long way to go.
Now, you've been on boards for 14 years now, across all sorts of private, public companies, PLCs, as well as Quangos. I'm curious, have you really seen an intensity? We heard it a minute ago in the last session from Hella, in terms of leaders upping their game and non-executives getting certified. Do you feel like your colleagues around the board table are all trying to up their game as well, and going from blah, blah to setting targets, whether it's on these really challenging 10 or 20-year goals like people and planet, given how short the life cycles are of the average executive?
Yeah, so I was really happy to be able to hear Helly's sort of talk on the nuts and bolts and the practicalities of how you make this work. I think it's a mixed picture, if I'm being really honest, that most non-executives they're involved maybe 2 or 3 days a month. They are wrapping their arms around some incredibly big challenges around this ESG agenda, the long run purpose and vision of the organization. But I have seen some fantastic examples of it. So I think if we can all learn from the best, I mean, one of the examples that I've been incredibly struck by recently, and I know that that Unilever is a poster child, but they are a poster child worth watching. So if I look at what the executive team working with the board have done in Unilever around setting out a framework for climate change and galvanizing energy across the entire consumer goods sector, you can really start to see what good looks like. And one of the things I'm very struck by, as you say, Kate, I stepped down from the CBI a year ago, had a bit of a lie down after that, but I have joined 2 really outstanding British national champions, HSBC and BAE, and I've been incredibly struck in the time that I've been a director how seriously directors are now taking their roles, that they are seeing themselves as guardian of the long-term values and the long-term purpose of the organizations that they join. And that's challenging given the short life cycles. It really is. And I love this idea actually of greater specification around the skill sets, because I think with that comes confidence, with that comes challenge, with that comes progress. So I feel I'm very much glass half full on this, in that I think you see some fantastic leadership, but I think that we need to be constantly challenging ourselves on, as board directors, on do we know enough? Do we have the skills? Learning from each other, which is why forums like today's are so important. But you know, I do feel there's a real energy out there in the boardroom now.
Now, you have tons of experience when it comes to leveraging the power of all the companies that supported the CBI. I forget how many hundreds of thousands you said. It was 190,000, some massive.
190,000, all sizes. Right.
And obviously, if a campaign with 190,000 people, 190,000 businesses takes off, or with Hella, we were talking about the 30%, the Chapter Zero, or I've been very involved with the 30% Club. When you get companies to share leadership, it will make a greater difference. But progress takes a lot longer. There are a lot of cats to herd. Ownership is more diffuse and perhaps less accountable. Whereas, you know, today where you're sitting on the boards at HSBC and BAE, it's perhaps a lot easier for those organizations to think about your stakeholders. Earlier, Ian talked about you know, the challenges he and Rachel were having because a business like theirs, right, has been really focused on what their shareholders are looking for. So, you know, that's been his priority. Do you think if you know, for any of the business leaders here today, how they manage that, what they can be accountable for in terms of their corporate agendas versus joining a campaign where perhaps priorities might get watered down? What's your perspective?
Yeah. It's a great question. You know, what can be done individually, what can be done collectively. There's one thing that I meant to mention at the beginning, though, which I think is relevant to this in terms of the change that's happened over the last 5 years. I think there are so many more businesses who don't see some of these issues around people, around planet, around governance as being counter to profit maximization. They really understand that they go hand in hand. So if I just give something I was absolutely committed to at the CBI was employee engagement. Just the more companies engage staff in strategy, in ideas, in climate, in how you do get diversity. You know, we focused in on it so hard after, as you say, the tremendous electric shock we had around George Floyd. You learn how engagement brings motivation, brings performance, brings life to an organization, which in turn turns into performance. And it's been, I think, incredibly encouraging to see that. And I think you're beginning to see it as well on climate, the sense that this doesn't have to be a dead weight cost. This can be an opportunity. And I think that is making that tension between profit and purpose far less sharp-edged. And you can have profit with purpose. And the really concrete example of what you're talking about, Kate, was change the race ratio, which happened actually very much towards the end of my time at the CBI, and the credit should really go to the team I had left behind. So Lord Karen Billamoria, my deputy Henrietta Jowett, who really ran with it. But to home in on that really concrete example, what had we seen coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd killing? This tremendous sort of anger around racial injustice. Put that alongside the fact we had the Parker Review, we'd had Ruby McGregor-Smith's review, all saying the same thing. We had not, as a business community and in many organizations, recognized that we had fundamental inequalities and injustices going right the way through the organization. But more than that, from a business point of view, we were missing out on talent. And actually, businesses would perform far better if they were creating more opportunities. So it was fascinating to watch how this took off. We launched Change the Race Ratio in the September of last year. By October, we had, I think, tens, if not hundreds of organizations signed up, having started with a set of 15 founders. And it is absolutely around the business sense of diversity in the boardroom. And I don't think that those companies that joined us on that journey were thinking there is a contradiction here between creating more opportunities and inclusion for people from all backgrounds with profit. They were thinking, actually, this is just a fantastic thing to do. And the other benefit you get from bringing businesses together is you do share the how. Going back to how you get beyond the blah, blah, how do you actually make things happen? And so the kind of toolkits that Change the Race Ratio is developing it's really around progression, recruitment, the kind of how you use networks in an organization, incredibly practical. So I'm a believer in both, the individual and the getting together and doing it together.
Great. Now, I may pause and add my own 2 cents here. In our executive search mandates at Sapphire, we see up close the pressure that CEOs and their executives teams have, and the challenge for boards of holding those leaders accountable on multi-year projects and priorities. We heard Ian earlier talk about how a lot of the things he kicked off will have had 10 and 20-year timeframes. So they're not going to know for long after he's gone if they're successful. Growing an internal pipeline of diverse talent is on most enlightened CEOs' agendas today. But I know well from my work with high potential talent, it takes a decade or more in most businesses to grow a promising manager into a senior leader with exco potential.
Yeah.
The average UK CEO tenure today is less than 5 years. And that number's been decreasing with the growth of activist investors and the growing agendas of CEOs, and COVID hasn't helped. Certainly, the average UK board member has a much longer tenure, roughly 9 years, than the CEOs they are overseeing. So here's my question for you, Carolyn. With those compressed timeframes and the challenges the planet is facing, as well as how long it takes to grow talent, what are your reflections on how you as a non-executive can help hold the business executives to account?
So I missed Ian's session, but what I know is that if you're a CEO running a PLC right now, the pressure of quarterly reporting, the pressure of the market, that eagle-eyed watching of what happens to a share price every time you make an announcement, particularly coming out of the COVID world, can be overwhelming. It really can. And you need incredibly broad shoulders, male or female. You need broad shoulders to be a CEO in the current environment. And I think that really is where the board comes in. That boards can be more long-term. They can take a step back and see themselves as the guardians of the future of the organization and the owners of the values. The number of boards and chairs I now hear talking about their role as guardians of values has grown exponentially in the last 5 years. The kinds of things I think a board can do is they can really ask to see succession plans. Now, when I was first involved as a board member, many years ago now, you might have seen a succession plan once every couple of years if you asked for it, and it would have been pretty sketchy. It might have sort of a couple of sides of paper. That has transformed. And I think that is because boards are really understanding the power of the pipeline. And it's not just diversity. It is, that's important, but it is also that if you don't grow your own talent, you are vulnerable. You are vulnerable to surprises of all sorts. So, and I think that is what we are increasingly going to see around climate as well. I think many CEOs and their teams are hugely committed to this agenda, but we can't be Pollyanna-ish about what the stock market can do in terms of the short run. And that is where I think boards can ask for that long-term charting of the future, kick the tires on it, and in a sense, be there to be the eyes, ears, and values of an organization, stretching well into the future. I've got this myself in spades in my work at the moment with BAE. BAE is currently designing equipment and defense material for 30 years hence, 30 years. So what is that engagement between a board and an executive that is going to enable that executive to plant the seeds of a future organization that is still here and thriving in 30 years' time? And it makes strategy very sharp-edged. It really has to be meaningful. It's not just the next budget or the next 3-year plan. It is true strategy, where and how you're going to compete. So I think it makes board life very interesting and very challenging. But that idea of being guardian of the long term, I think that's something that it feels like it's if it's not brand new, it's new in the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
Now I'm gonna maybe ask one last question, but if you could make just one recommendation for the participants at the summit here today, and feel free to make more than one, but for what they could do, taking back to their organizations to help ensure that the leaders of their charities and businesses and not-for-profits are focusing on the mission critical issues here of planet and people.
Yeah.
What would you want them to do?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I've probably got 4 or 5 answers to it, but I will just give you one, Kate, because I've seen this in action, and boy, I think it's powerful. I think opening organizations up to the young voices within them is electric. We have a generation coming through who are challenging, visionary, inspiring, know what they want to see from the world and the workplace. They're kind of different from the way we were. They're more challenging, but they tell stories. And I think that if you can connect the leadership generation in an organization with the new generation in an organization, you can make great things happen. And I know some companies that have created a Y-co alongside their X-co. Gen Y is there absolutely in the room. You don't have to do that. I was a party the other day to a fantastic session with new graduates just joining HSBC. And they were talking about what they wanted from their jobs, what they wanted from their careers, and what they expected HSBC to be doing in terms of people and planet. And their bar is really high. And so I think if all of us go back and make that conversation happen, and I think we saw it at COP. I think we saw those young voices, some of the most powerful voices that we heard in COP, and it wasn't just Greta. It was it was those young voices we were hearing from the Asian islands, from the parts of the world so affected by what will happen if we don't take the action that we need. Let's hear those young voices, because they will change minds, and it goes back actually to, I think, point was made in the last session. This has to be about hearts as well as heads, and business is about hearts. I sometimes do think that if business took a misstep, which I think it arguably did, I think this relentless focus on profit maximization and shareholder value in an incredibly, I'm an economist by training, but we were incredibly numbers driven, and we talked about human resources rather than talking about people. Business lost the bit that was about the heart, and I think it's coming back. And as long as we recognize, and I think increasingly we can prove it, that getting the heart right in terms of purpose, in terms of inclusion, in terms of clarity of where you're going and why, actually it goes hand in hand with profit. And the young generation can tell us that more clearly than anybody else.
Brilliant. Now, Sandra, I do have more questions, but I'd love for it to be a conversation and for you or any of the other participants to join in.
There are great questions. I know both of you will want to weigh in. Can't thank you both enough. Such positivity and such energy and such hopeful wisdom from both of you. So yes, we've got really good questions. If I can ask Khalid Aziz to unmute yourself, Khalid, and hopefully Reg can put the spotlight for you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we go to your change the ratio on race, which I was fascinated to hear more about. We've seen compelling statistics on the ethnic minority numbers in youth cricket compared with county cricket in the racism scandal in Yorkshire. And I think the numbers are 30% in youth cricket who are Asians, and then only 4% get through to county cricket. I worked in Yorkshire in Leeds for 4.5 years, and I always felt uncomfortable in Headingley, I have to say. But is anyone keeping the statistics, Carolyn, perhaps the CBI, for measuring the same issue in the same way in UK boardrooms?
Yeah, a great question. And yeah, I think that we can only just be shocked to the core at the kind of racism that we've seen in so many of our institutions. And I was very shocked to see it and hear about it in the workplace when as soon as you start listening properly, you hear stories that shock you to your core, and the answers to what you do about that. There are many of them, but one of them is about measurement. It is definitely about measurement. And one of the things that Change the Race Ratio is absolutely doing is trying to do the same thing that the Davis Commission and then Hampton-Alexander did around women in the boardroom and the pipeline, because that was one of the things that happened actually very quickly with Hampton-Alexander, is it moved, and Kate will know this better than anybody, it moved from just being worried about boardroom to being worried about EXCO and EXCO -1. And I think the numbers are currently very poor, that you have recruitment that is looking pretty balanced in terms of the population, and then as you go through the ranks, and I think that the statistics at the moment are, I think something like 30% of FTSE 100 companies don't have a single ethnically diverse member on their board, and that doubles when you get to FTSE 250 companies. And so we've got an awfully long way to go. And then what Hampton-Alexander did, and Davis before them, is that they then measured EXCO and EXCO -1. Cranfield University were a fantastic partner on it. You need proper data, people need to trust it. And the CBI are helping that to happen now. We have snapshots of it. So the Parker Review did it, McGregor Smith Review did it. But what we need is that rolling set of data to really make a difference. And the other thing you need is targets. So the other thing that Change the Race Ratio has done is to set a target. Every FTSE 100 company should have at least one ethnically diverse board member by the end of 2021, and that every FTSE 350 should have the same by the end of 2024. So those are the metrics. And I think we need to get the same kind of oxygen behind them in the public sphere as we had around gender, because actually we achieved a lot on gender. Now we need to turn our eyes to this.
Thank you, Carolyn. And very much in the same vein, I have a similar board composition question from Nick Archer, and then we'll go on to Chris Winning. Nick?
Thanks very much, Sandra. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Carolyn. Carolyn, I wonder what your advice would be to an executive committee that sees itself as progressive, but finds itself with a board which is still, to use that overused phrase, stale, pale, male, and really is having a lot of tension. Is there some magic wand or a catalyst that can be waved to help some of those boards revitalize themselves and smell the coffee?
Yeah. It's it is a great question, and there are still quite a lot of boards out there that I think, if you hold a mirror up, and diversity is a complicated thing. It's I've become very interested in diversity around social background as well, because I think that we have made more progress on gender than we have on that. I think there's another issue around disability that is a new frontier. We understand that very little, and declaration around disability is extremely difficult. One of the things that I think is powerful in boards is how you actually select board members, and to what extent you absolutely require them to have had the bang-on experience, historically, to have proven that they can do it elsewhere, or whether you will go more on potential. And I think what we've seen through the success around gender on boards is that going on potential can really work. That you've got now a cadre of women who are able to be fantastic women. But if you go back to when they first applied, actually, if you look at them on paper, in the old world, and Kate, do come in on this because you'll have seen this as well, they would have been deemed as insufficiently experienced. And if we always go on experience, nothing will ever change. I remember somebody once saying to me, how long is it going to take before we have, whatever it was, 30% women in the boardroom? And on the trends before the Davis Commission, the answer was never. The answer was absolutely never. There was no trajectory that was going to get you there. And I think that is how we are now in some of these other dimensions of diversity. So it comes down to chairs and nomination committees and wonderful people like Kate, who goes out and finds people with potential from all backgrounds and makes the case for them that you will get change. And the good thing is we've shown we can do it on gender. We now need to do it on other things as well.
Thank you.
I mean, Kate, do come in on that, honestly, because, you have been an absolute, pioneer in terms of looking for potential rather than having to have the proof in, a CV that shows everything.
No, well, thank you, Caroline. I will come in for a second, Nick. I think really all you need is one enlightened or brave non-executive or executive to say to the chairman, I think we should look at that spec. Maybe all those skills are not required. They might be desired. I think secondly, let's look at the search partner we're using. If we're using the same old search partner we've always used, then we're going to get what we've always gotten. And to, think about it, as Carolyn said, really broadening the filters and, thinking in terms of your community and whether it's your customers, especially if it's a B2C company, but even if it's a B2B, getting the supply chain represented. We know the research is out there in spades that boards that are pale, male, and stale aren't going to maximize their returns anymore if you just look at it from purely an economic standpoint. But all you need is one enlightened Ed to say, let's think a little bit harder. Let's take a chance on Jenny or Jane.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate, Carolyn, and Khaled and Nick for some really good questions. I think sort of staying with the issue of boards and diversity and talent, Chris, delighted to invite Chris Winning. Chris is our director who looks at best practices. And Chris, I know you had a question in this area.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you very much, Caroline and Kate, for a super rich, positive, and energetic discussion Q&A. It's been great to listen. Diversity comes in several ways. One we haven't mentioned is sexual orientation. Could be sexual orientation. It could be disability or sexual orientation. I'm going to a conference tomorrow called You're Out at my business school, London Business School, and there are surprisingly few gay male leaders on boards. I mean, there are the famous ones we know about, but there are very few. So there are plenty of untapped areas we could talk about. But say in 10 years' time, you've got the perfectly diverse board in terms of sexual orientation, disability, gender, etc., race. These are things that we've mentioned. What do you get that's different from the stale male pale board? And Caroline, I'm very interested to hear on about your experience, how you have changed the dynamic on the boards of HSBC and BAE. So having a strong woman's voice, thinking about things in a different way. How does it make those companies go in a different direction? And how would a strong gay male voice or a strong disabled voice do the same thing? What more can these companies then do in the areas that we all know matter?
Well, thanks so much, Chris. And forgive me for not mentioning sexual orientation. It was a pure oversight. It's a hugely important element of diversity. And I've seen that in action and completely back you on that. I think that the alchemy of people from different backgrounds is extraordinary. And I have felt it just personally in groups that I am with, and we probably all have. If you're all from the same backgrounds, why do you bring social background into it as well? If you all went to the same university, or from there is a groupthink. There is a groupthink, and if you're looking at the kind of innovation that we're going to need to be able to tackle climate change or post-COVID and the health challenges that we've got, many, you can list them, you need to have the team of all the talents, and challenge has to come from all different directions. I think that is one of the most powerful things. But there's something else in all of this that I have noticed, and I'll give you a concrete example in a moment, Chris, to your specific about what I personally feel I can bring to all of this. You know, people behave differently if they don't feel as though they belong. They just do. They're quieter, they're more careful in what they say. And that whole kind of phrase, you're bringing your whole self to work, it's a really real thing. And I felt it. You know, if I'm in a situation where I'm uncomfortable and feel very different for whatever reason, I am quieter. I just don't challenge, don't speak up, don't speak out. So we're losing all of these ideas by creating environments that aren't properly inclusive. And one of the things that I have done, I've recently joined HSBC, and I have joined 2 of the groups. They've invited board members to actively join the networks. So I've joined the Disability Network, and I've joined the Ethnic Diversity Network, Embrace, they're called Embrace and Ability. And it has been absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I want to do is to be part of all of their meetings. And I'm going to join them for as many of the meetings as I can, hearing from young people with disabilities across HSBC all over the world. I mean, it's been extraordinary so far. And the same thing in terms of ethnicity. And I'm going to help take their voices to the board table. They can come and make their own noise, and they can come and have their own time with the board. I'll make sure of that. But one of the things I feel is my responsibility, now I'm in touch with them, is I want to be their ally around the board table. And I don't think I really understood this concept of allyship until recently, and particularly in light of what we've seen around ethnicity. The idea of who speaks up for you when you're not in the room. I think having people around a board table who are doing that is the way of the future. And that's my commitment to the boards that I'm part of.
Caroline put that brilliantly. I can't possibly say anything more enlightened than that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for those comments. And I mean, I'm, as Sandra says, being brought into ECHO for best practice, and particularly in the area of making change happen within complex organizations. Again, HSBC, BAE would be brilliant examples. Once the tone has been set at the top, how do you roll out the change? And I really like the point you made about if people don't feel they belong, they won't trust, and they won't do that different thing. And often it's not a particularly complicated different thing they need to do, and they've got the information to do it, but it is one of the blocks that communications in particular can help to lift.
Completely. And the work you're doing on this, you know, I think it will really count. And you know, I think it's another example of where connecting different organizations, because this is quite hard stuff, actually, and particularly if you're trying to do it in really big, culturally diverse global organizations, how we can share the ideas between us. I think, you know, the work you're doing to help do that is fantastic.
Thank you. Great question, Chris. Thank you. And Carolyn, love the magic of the alchemy that you mentioned. I just think that's a lovely way of viewing it. And a question for you, Kate, as we just wrap up. I mean, yes, you need someone brave, courageous, insightful to give you the brief in the first place. Are you seeing a definite change in tempo and these kind of questions coming through to you? Is that starting to happen now, or is it still very much a push from your side?
No, I'm hugely optimistic. We've never been busier. We've never had more companies thinking harder about how they recruit both their executives and their non-executives. So no, I'm you know, really bullish. And you know, the Sapphire has been around for 17 years, I think. So we also have a lot more competition there, a lot more search firms paying attention to topics like directors who are climate expert, or the different underrepresented groups, not just around boardrooms, but in the pipeline. So no, I think we should all feel like the biggest, as well as, you know, mid-sized and small companies, all have this on their agenda.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the mid-sized and small companies, because that's 80% of our economy are in the mid-sized and small space. But we do see that I think that demand for leadership, particularly among the larger organizations, to show the way through. But yes, it's the big and the small companies that need to make it happen. There's so much more we can explore. Kate, Carolyn, you have both been awesome. I hope you can stay with us for our final wrap-up panel.